Hi, this is Dr. Mercola, and today we're going to talk about a very important topic to your health, which is indoor air pollution. Why? For two important reasons. One is that your indoor air is up to 5 times more polluted than the outdoor air. And the second, and perhaps more important, is that you spend, or at least most people spend, up to 90% of their time indoors. So if you're not paying attention to this important issue, then you're going to really be exposed to potential pathogens and environmental toxins that could be detrimental to your health. So before I discuss different alternatives and how you would address this problem and how you might filter the air, let me discuss a really important issue that's important to anyone who lives in a home, and that is potential problems with mold. Why do I want to discuss it first? Because I want to warn you that mold cannot be remediated by any filter at all. No filter can take care of mold. The only way to address mold is through proper remediation. And there are many people who know they have mold problems, even more people who don't. And let me tell you that it's a real big issue because these mold spores actually secrete toxins. So, and I can tell you this from personal experience because my home was recently infected with mold, and I thought it was remediated and used some pretty impressive technology to try to use after I thought it was remediated, and it didn't work, and that's how I knew it didn't work. And let me tell you the problem here is that mold is an issue if you have high indoor humidity, which can usually be related to water infiltrating into your home, typically through a leak in the roof or the ceiling, or more commonly if you have a basement through a leak in your foundation. But you can also have indoor plumbing that will contribute to that, and high levels of humidity. So that's a recipe for disaster because mold spores are pervasive. You are not going to get down to 0 mold spores. They're everywhere. So they're usually at maybe a few hundred mold spores per cubic meter, but they're there. So all you need is the right conditions with enough humidity to allow that to occur, and they will start multiplying like rabbits. I mean, they'll just be pervasive, and before you know it, if you don't address this, your home can actually become unlivable and will need to be condemned. And this is not a stretch. Many people have to do this, especially in areas that are flooded. They just have to tear the home down because there's just no way you can repair it. You have to take all the structures out. So it's really important. If you think you have a problem, listen to some of the interviews that I have done and will be doing with some of the experts that go into the specific details because it's really important. And to document objectively through mold analysis testing that you have your problem under control. Once it's under control, then you can look at some different types of air filtration technologies. And there are basically 2 different types. One is a passive type, the other is an active type. And the two passive types, one of the important ones, and I'm sure everyone has heard of, it's called HEPA filters. Great filters. They are phenomenal at filtering out material from the environment, but you have to understand some important components of HEPA. Any of the passive filters, if they're used alone, are going to be problematic because for one reason, specifically with HEPA, let me just give you an illustration, is that these mold, it will very effectively capture most of the mold spores. Not all of them, but most of them. So the mold spores are sitting on the HEPA filter. And the problem is that if you don't change that filter really regularly and you add humidity, that filter media can actually serve as a petri dish for these mold spores, and they'll start growing rapidly, producing more toxins in the environment than if you hadn't had the HEPA filter at all. So that's a real potential problem, and most people aren't aware of this. It's a real significant issue. Now, the other problem with HEPA filters is the volume of air that's exposed to it. For the most part, HEPA filters are really one-unit systems designed to work for a few hundred square feet, certainly not a whole house where you have 3,000 square feet or more. So that's one issue. But even if for some reason you had this ventilation system that was just perfect and got every bit of square foot in your home to go through this filter, the problem is it's going to do absolutely nothing about the surfaces in your home, the doorknobs, the cabinets, the countertops. You know, these are areas that easily become contaminated, and the filter is not going to address in any way, shape, or form. So those are 2 downsides of using HEPA filters by themselves. Done in conjunction with an active process, it can be quite good, especially if you're very careful about paying strict attention to changing the filters on a regular basis to make sure that any of those mold spores are removed and not given the opportunity to grow. So another type of passive system that can be used are the electrostatic filters, which is usually a system designed to create charged particles and attract and precipitate out pollutants in the environment. It seems to make a lot of sense, but the problem is that they typically are not involved with the fan. They don't really expose hardly any volume of air to this process, and they're actually even worse than HEPA filters. And they have all the incumbent issues because they're really, you're not getting the volume of the air and you're not treating the surfaces at all. So you really need, if you're going to properly address this in an active way, is an active system. So what are the active processes that can actually help improve the quality of your air in your home and decrease indoor air pollution because it's so pervasive? Well, it's interestingly, this is for the most part a 21st century innovation. It came about in the late part of the 20th. For the most part, this is really new and innovative. But the main process out there is something called PCO, which is short for photocatalytic oxidation. And this is a process that uses ultraviolet light to shine on a titanium dioxide plate, and that interaction with the light and the titanium dioxide produces three constituents, primarily hydroperoxide ions, superoxide ions, and hydroxyl radicals. And these are highly reactive catalysts that interact with the environment to help purify it in a way very similar to the way nature does this. Didn't it ever occur to you or wonder that how could we have all these cars outside in factories making incredible pollution, yet for the most part, outside air is significantly cleaner than inside air? Is because nature has these processes, dynamic, it's ongoing, it's sort of a continuous refreshing, rebuilding, and replenishing of the quality of the air. But when we take the air inside, we have all this indoor air pollution, and these same processes don't exist. So what this active process that's created by these devices is that it goes in there at a very fine level and seeks to emulate or reproduce what nature does outside. And by producing these ions, they're able to interact with indoor air pollutants, things like volatile organic chemicals that are outgassing from fiberboard, formaldehyde in your fiberboard, which is pervasive. Unless you have wood cabinets, you've got fiberboard in there. It takes years for that to come out. But there's also the stain resistant material are chemicals on your carpet. So that's going to increase pollution. And there's just dozens or hundreds of chemicals. Chemicals that are under your kitchen sink tend to volatilize out. If you're cooking with Teflon cookware, which I don't recommend, that's another volatile problem that's going to pollute your indoor air. So if you have an active process going on, potentially even in conjunction with one of the passive ones like HEPA, then you've got the only real opportunity to clean the air. Because not only will it clean the air, but these ions that are generated are pervasive. They tend to go, for the most part, in most of your entire home, unless it's massive. I mean, it's under 3,000 square feet. One of these units tend to treat the whole home, so you don't need one for every room. But in addition to treating the air, it also treats the surfaces, so that your doorknobs will be contaminated, so that your kitchen counters tend to be not an issue. But again, I want to warn you, it sounds like a wonderful process, and it absolutely is. The warning here is that these are not a solution for a mold issue. And yes, it will help the residual mold spores that are normal and common everywhere, outside, inside. But if you have contaminated home with elevated mold spores, this system will not. No system will do that. You have to remediate it. If you've got a leak in the foundation of your basement, if you've got indoor plumbing leaks, if you've had a flood, you've got to get in there and have a professional take care of that. Then these things are golden. They will work. And I actually made the mistake of doing some initial mold repair in my home, thought it was remediated, and then used these devices. And I said, well, let's take a count after we did how it was still elevated, and then we had to tear lots of structural materials out to find that it was a leaky foundation that was contributing to the levels, and that had to be fixed. And once it's fixed, they work incredibly well. So that's the key thing here, is don't make the mistake that these are going to be a solution for mold pollution, because they're not. You really have to go into it. But for every other problem, it's phenomenal. It really does an amazing job at addressing the cause by providing a natural process that is seeks to replicate and emulate what nature does outside indoors. And in some ways, it's very similar to what our own body does to fight infections. We have this oxidative process that our white blood cells and macrophages tend to employ to destroy, to essentially burst and damage pathogens in our system. That's the way we kill viruses and bacteria, and very similar to the way this does. So it's really a natural product. There's no chemicals, there's no toxins involved. The ions that are produced are very short-lived. They're literally there for only seconds or less, and they do their job and they're gone, so they don't build up at toxic levels. NASA on the International Space Station has deployed this technology initially to remove ethylene, which they couldn't really remove through their scrubbers in the same way they would remove carbon dioxide, and had a real challenge with it. And when they found this technology, it turned out to be very effective for removing the ethylene. But not only ethylene, but the hundreds, if not thousands of other chemicals that were up there that were outgassed and they couldn't get rid of. So it was a phenomenal solution for it. They use it up in the space station. So it's useful for that approach. But in addition to that, it also removes odors and allergens, things like dust or pet dander. If you have any pets, that can be an issue. It actually decimates and removes that dander, and it will remove odors very effectively, which is certainly not a toxin, but can be offensive to many people. So it's a really useful and effective strategy for that. Now, some people have concerns about this technology, and I wanted to address those concerns up front. There have been multi-level marketing companies in the past that have been criticized by the FTC for making unfounded health claims. It's not that the health benefits weren't true and valid and could be documented, but they didn't have significant scientific credible evidence to support that, so the FTC really caused them to stop making those claims. So this device is although it uses similar technology, it's not related to any of those companies. Now, the other issue that some people have concern about is ozone. And because this device does produce some ozone, but it produces in levels that's similar to what you find in nature. It is not in any way, shape, or form above the threshold set by the EPA. In nature, it's actually part of the process to clean and rejuvenate the environment. But you may be confused because when you watch your weather report, they'll document in the summer, typically they'll document these high ozone levels. Well, the ozone levels are there as a side effect, sort of an innocent bystander of what happens when you have extra pollution, because the pollution comes out and it actually increases the ozone level. So it goes up when the other pollutants go up. But it's actually part of because it's there to address the problems and to help remediate and remove and lower those levels. That's why it's elevated. But if you do get high levels indoors, it can be problematic. So that's why we want to keep it to safe, low levels. But ozone is a phenomenally effective reducer an eliminator of odors. I mean, there's just almost nothing that beats ozone for eliminating odors. And the model that we have here actually has a level. It's called an away mode, where you can leave your home and make sure that no pets are in the home, and you could put higher levels of ozone to eliminate, and it has a timer on it, so it will turn off by itself, to eliminate all those odors. So it's a really neat feature. But normally when it's operating, it's producing very safe levels of ozone that are not problematic to health. So overall, indoor air pollution is an issue. It's a potential threat to you and your family's health, considering the fact that indoor air is 5 times more polluted than outdoor, and we spend 90% of our time indoors. So we really do need some solution to address this. If you can't afford one of these units, one of the simplest things that you can do is just simply, every day, even in the winter, open up your windows, preferably on opposite sides of the house, so you get some ventilation, so you can at least remove some of these toxins on a regular basis. But even better would be to employ a system that uses active technology like I described, to go in there and replicate what nature does outdoors inside, so you can have a clean, pathogen-free, odor-free environment. So these are really important tools that you can employ to keep you and your family continually taking control of your health.